April 18, 1942. Somewhere over the dark expanse of the Pacific, 600 miles from Japan, the USS Hornet's flight deck was alive with a tense, mechanical heartbeat. Engines idled, turbines humming beneath the skin of the massive carrier, vibrating through steel and bone alike. Salt spray stung the faces of young sailors who crouched beside anti-aircraft guns, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of enemy scouts. Dawn had yet to break. The sky was a bruised purple, low clouds swirling in slow, lazy patterns. The wind off the Pacific was brisk, biting through flight jackets and leather gloves alike, carrying the faint tang of diesel and gun oil. Inside the ready room, Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle, 34, adjusted his flight cap and stared at the carefully arranged grid map on the table. His jaw was tight, his eyes calculating, as though willing the numbers to align. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, medium-range, twin-engine marvels of American ingenuity, would launch from this tiny floating airstrip and strike the heart of Japan, Tokyo itself. Japanese commanders had laughed at the idea that any American aircraft could reach their capital. Yet here they were, perched on the precipice of history. Captain Ted Lawson, 25, from Jackson, Mississippi, traced the route with a finger. Thoughts of his young wife back home flickered briefly through his mind before he shoved them away. "This isn't just a flight," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of pre-flight engines. "It's a statement." Around him, the other pilots, most barely older than 20, checked instruments, strapped themselves into harnesses, and ran pre-flight procedures with the cold precision of men who had faced death in training, but never like this. The B-25 itself sat on the deck like a caged beast, its polished aluminum skin glinting faintly in the pre-dawn light. The aircraft's Wright R-2600 engines growled softly, eager and impatient, coaxed into life by skilled ground crews. The bomb bays had been stripped of weight where possible. Radios tuned, fuel tanks packed to bursting. Each plane carried 2 500-pound bombs, enough to turn city blocks into rubble. The cockpit was tight, instruments glowing faintly in the dim light, and the smell of oil, rubber, and heated metal was thick enough to taste. Doolittle's voice cut through the tension, firm and unwavering. "Gentlemen, this mission will take every ounce of courage you have. The Japanese do not expect us. They will not anticipate our arrival. Fly fast, hit hard, and get yourselves home if you can." He paused, letting the gravity sink in. "Make no mistake. This is the beginning of a new phase of the war." Outside, the first B-25 rumbled toward the catapult, tires squealing as steel cables tightened like a bowstring. The carrier heaved beneath them, waves hammering the hull, salt spray soaking the deck. Pilots gripped control sticks, hearts hammering, aware that one miscalculation would mean plunging into the unforgiving sea. Engines screamed, turbines spooled to full throttle, and the Mitchells lurched forward. The launch was imminent. Every man on deck held his breath. Somewhere below the horizon, the Japanese homeland slept, unaware that the first tendrils of fear were about to reach across the water. The sky, the sea, the steel, the men, all waited. A single heartbeat, a single moment, and history would be rewritten. April 18, 1942. Just off the coast of Honshu, Japan. The first B-25. Mitchell leapt from the USS Hornet like a mechanical bird freed from a cage. Its twin engines screamed in unison, propellers churning the salt-laden air, and the aircraft climbed steeply, trembling under the weight of fuel and bombs. Below, the carrier deck dropped away, waves smashing against steel hulls. Crewmen cheered and cursed simultaneously, though their voices were swallowed by the roar of the engines. Inside the cockpit, Captain Ted Lawson gritted his teeth, eyes locked on the horizon. Instruments flickered as the plane strained against gravity. He felt every vibration, every shudder of the airframe, the smell of heated oil thick in the cabin. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Richard Cole, a wiry 24-year-old from Dayton, Ohio, adjusted the throttle and muttered under his breath, "Here goes everything." The Mitchells were not designed for carrier launches. They had barely enough runway to achieve liftoff, and the Hornet's deck was a fraction of a normal airfield. Each takeoff was a calculated gamble. The pilots had trained for months, simulating short-field launches, but nothing could fully prepare them for the sudden void beneath the wheels. One misstep, one gust of wind, one engine sputter, and the Pacific would claim them instantly. As the remaining 15 bombers lifted off in sequence, Doolittle's aircraft, the 16th in line, climbed last. From his perspective, the Hornet shrank into the sea, a tiny island in a vast, heaving expanse. He glimpsed Lawson's B-25 ahead, a silver streak against the rising sun, and felt a surge of awe and fear. "God help us," he whispered, though he did not dare say it aloud. Above them, the sky was a thin, icy blue. Winds were mercifully calm, but the temperature dropped sharply at higher altitudes, frosting instrument gauges and numbing fingertips. Clouds drifted like ghostly islands, and below, the Pacific roared endlessly. Every minute in the air was measured, calculated. Fuel consumption was critical. Any deviation could mean missing the target, or worse, ditching in the ocean with nothing but life rafts and hope. The Japanese homeland still lay beyond the horizon, untouched and confident. Intelligence reports had convinced them that American bombers could never reach Tokyo. They imagined a shield of mountains, miles of open ocean, and vigilant fighters ready to intercept any daring intruder. They had no idea that 16 Mitchells, loaded with destruction and audacity, were already airborne. In the cockpits, pilots settled into a tense rhythm. Engines hummed, gauges flickered, and every glance outside reminded them of the stakes. One crew checked the bomb bay doors, ensuring the load was secure. Another monitored the radio for updates, though the vast distance made communication sparse. Each man was a paradox of nerves and focus, adrenaline and exhaustion, aware that one miscalculation could end his life in an instant. And yet, despite the danger, there was a thrill, a pulse of defiance. These men were about to strike the heart of an empire that had seemed untouchable. They were ghosts, shadows in the sky, moving with mechanical precision and human courage. Somewhere over the endless blue, the first ripples of fear would soon reach Japanese commanders. April 18th, 1942. Over the Japanese mainland, approaching Tokyo. The horizon was beginning to glow with the faint blush of morning, a deceptive serenity masking the chaos to come. The Mitchells cut through the sky, silver silhouettes against the awakening sun. The Japanese mainland stretched below like a sleeping giant, mountains rolling into industrial valleys, rivers glinting like threads of silver. Smoke from small towns rose lazily, unaware of the storm descending from above. Captain Ted Lawson gripped the control stick tightly, knuckles white, as Tokyo's sprawl came into view. His bomber, laden with 2 500-pound bombs, shuddered under the strain of altitude and fuel. The engines hummed a warning undercurrent, and he felt the vibration of metal flexing, the aircraft alive beneath him. Cole leaned forward, scanning rooftops and streets. "They don't expect us," he muttered, eyes narrowing at the grid of the city below. Far below, Japanese lookouts stirred, though most still dismissed the distant roar as routine. To them, an American bomber over Tokyo was unimaginable, a myth, a fantasy whispered in intelligence briefings. But there they were, 16 B-25s, daring, fast, impossible, skimming across the skyline. The first bombers began their descent, engines throttled for attack. Pilots fought gravity, wind, and the limitations of their aircraft to line up targets precisely: rail yards, factories, and fuel depots. The silence in the Mitchell's cockpits was punctuated only by the growl of the Wright R-2600s and the occasional mechanical click of bombs armed and ready. Crewmen exchanged quick, tense glances. No one spoke unnecessarily. Each had rehearsed this moment countless times, yet reality demanded split-second judgment. Lawson's hands danced over controls, flaps, and throttle, balancing speed and angle. He calculated bomb trajectories using only sight, instinct, and experience. Suddenly, anti-aircraft fire erupted below, tiny pinpricks of black smoke blooming into deadly white puffs. The Japanese defenders scrambled, guns firing blindly, hoping to clip wings or engines. The bombs fell, skidding across rooftops, bouncing dangerously before detonating in clouds of flame and shrapnel. Streets lit up with destruction, plumes of smoke rising like dark specters. Lawson felt the recoil of each bomb, the tremor through the fuselage. From a Japanese command post in Tokyo, General Masao Nakamura, 42, watched with disbelief as reports flooded in. American bombers over the city. He clenched his fists. "Impossible!" he roared, pounding the desk. His officers exchanged panicked glances, the myth of invulnerability shattered in minutes. Overhead, the sound of engines, the metallic growl of the Mitchells, was now a herald of fear, a reminder that even the vast Pacific was no barrier. In the cockpits, adrenaline surged. One near miss, a shell that tore through a wingtip, sent a jolt through Lawson's aircraft, but his training and focus held. He fired defensive rounds at pursuing fighters, the stingers of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force diving and weaving, trying to intercept. Metal screamed against metal, bullets pinging off fuselage. Smoke trails marked enemy positions, but the Mitchells pressed on, bombs released with precision, chaos spreading below. The city was ablaze, a living map of destruction. Civilians ran through streets, startled by explosions that shook buildings and shattered windows. For the first time, Japan faced the reality. The war was no longer distant. The Americans could strike at the heart of their empire. And above them, 16 B-25s, vulnerable yet fearless, sliced through the morning sky, a testament to audacity, planning, and courage. April 18, 1942. Tokyo skies, chaos in full bloom. The Mitchells had done the impossible. Tokyo lay under attack. But the danger was far from over. Japanese fighters roared into action, their Ki-43 Oscars streaking through the smoke-laden sky like arrows fired from an invisible bow. The B-25s, built for medium-altitude bombing rather than dogfighting, became suddenly fragile prey in a predator's sky. Captain Lawson's bomber pitched sharply as an Oscar dove from above, guns blazing. Tracers cut through the air, some pinging off the fuselage, others punching through metal and shattering windows. The bombardier, Lieutenant Robert Height, leaned back, firing the tail guns with rapid, calculated bursts. Each pull of the trigger was a prayer, each flash of smoke a desperate hope to keep the aircraft alive. Flying at 10,000 feet, the B-25 struggled against both gravity and enemy fire. Engines strained under full throttle, exhaust blacking with every maneuver. Pilots had to calculate speed, altitude, and evasive angles while keeping bombs aimed at targets and staying alive. The cockpit was a storm of tension, sweat, and oil. Cole's eyes darted across the instrument panel, checking fuel, engine temperatures, and the dwindling ammunition. One miscalculation, a stalled engine, a jammed weapon, could mean instant death. In the midst of the chaos, Lieutenant Henry Mike Morgan, 22, from Pennsylvania, pulled off a maneuver that defied probability. Diving steeply to avoid a tracer-lined Oscar, he banked sharply, forcing the Japanese fighter past the nose of his plane. The enemy overshot, engine screaming in frustration, and Morgan exhaled, the taste of smoke and adrenaline thick in his mouth. Moments like this, each decision a razor's edge between survival and oblivion, define the raid. Bombs continued to find their mark. Rail yards erupted, warehouses ignited, and fuel depots exploded in geysers of flame that sent shockwaves through the city. Smoke mingled with the rising sun, creating a surreal, apocalyptic landscape. For the Japanese defenders, it was a nightmare made real. Their most secure cities were vulnerable, their myth of invincibility crumbling with every passing second. Back aboard the Hornet, crewmen craned their necks toward the horizon, scanning for the retreating silhouettes. Radio chatter crackled sporadically, reports of damaged aircraft, evasive maneuvers, and one pilot calling for guidance to find the nearest friendly airstrip. Every second was tense. Every heartbeat counted. The Mitchells, though battered and outnumbered, pressed on with precision and bravery that would soon be etched into legend. For Lawson, Cole, and their crews, there was no time to reflect. Each moment was a test. Dodge, fire, navigate, survive. The city below was aflame, enemy fighters were relentless, and fuel was running dangerously low. Yet the B-25s pressed on, their engines screaming, their crews determined. Every pilot knew this was more than a mission. It was a declaration. The Americans could reach the heart of Japan, and nothing would be the same again. April 18, 1942. Skies over Japan, retreat and reckoning. The raid had inflicted shock and destruction, but now the Mitchell crews faced perhaps the deadliest part of their mission: survival. Tokyo lay behind them, smoldering, a city that had believed itself untouchable. Ahead stretched the vast, unforgiving Pacific, thousands of miles of empty water separating them from safety. Engines groaned under the strain of overuse. Fuel gauges dipped into the red, and every pilot knew there would be no second chance. Lieutenant Ted Lawson's B-25 shuddered violently as one engine coughed and sputtered, a victim of both combat and the overtaxed machinery. "Come on, baby, hold together," he whispered, gripping the yoke with white-knuckled intensity. Beside him, Cole scanned the horizon, searching for a friendly landing strip on the Chinese coast. The only refuge available. Every minute was a negotiation with fate. Push too hard and risk catastrophic engine failure, go too slow and run out of fuel. Some crews were less fortunate. One bomber, riddled with flak, spiraled downward, crashing into the sea in a plume of fire and spray. Radio transmissions crackled with frantic voices, some pleading for guidance, others issuing calm orders to maintain formation. The human cost of audacity was now starkly visible, and yet the remaining crews pressed onward, driven by duty, training, and sheer willpower. Amid the chaos, acts of heroism shone through. Sergeant David Thatcher, manning the tail guns, destroyed an enemy fighter that dove on his plane. Lieutenant William Farrow, in another bomber, took evasive action to shield a damaged comrade from pursuing Ka-43s, trading position for safety and risking his own aircraft. Every decision, Every maneuver was a delicate balance of courage and desperation, a choreography of survival under fire. Hours stretched interminably as the Mitchells made their slow, fuel-starved flight toward China. The Pacific below was an endless expanse of gray, waves crashing silently against invisible reefs. Exhaustion gnawed at bodies cramped in tight cockpits, and the once crisp air smelled of oil, sweat, and smoke. Pilots whispered prayers, silently counting the miles and the minutes until land would appear. Finally, for some, the faint outline of the Chinese coast emerged. A jagged salvation after hours of tension. Bombers touched down on makeshift airfields, engines whining as they fought gravity and terrain. For others, the journey ended in tragedy, forced ditching, capture, or death at sea. The raid had succeeded in its strategic and psychological aims, but it came at a harrowing human cost. As Lawson's bomber finally taxied to a halt, the weight of what they had achieved settled in. Tokyo had been struck. Japan's sense of invulnerability shattered. Yet the victory was tempered by loss, by the knowledge that courage alone could not guarantee survival. The men disembarked, faces streaked with sweat, oil, and tears, their eyes reflecting exhaustion, grief, and the quiet pride of having touched history. April 19th, 20th, 1942. Makeshift airfields in eastern China. The surviving Mitchell crews stumbled from their aircraft, bodies stiff from hours of cramped flight and adrenaline. The smell of burning oil, smoke, and the distant echoes of explosions clung to them. Local Chinese villagers gathered cautiously, guiding the exhausted Americans to temporary shelters, bringing water, blankets, and cautious smiles. Relief washed over the men, but it was tinged with guilt, for comrades lost, for the destruction left behind, for the unknown fates of those still in the air or in enemy hands. Captain Ted Lawson leaned against his plane, staring at the horizon, recalling the city that moments before had seemed untouchable. He traced the path of the bombs across Tokyo, imagining the fires consuming rail yards and factories. It had worked. The psychological impact on Japan was immediate. Commanders who had scoffed at the notion of an American bomber reaching their capital now faced the humiliating truth. Their homeland was vulnerable. Doolittle gathered his surviving crews for a brief, solemn debrief. Faces weary, eyes haunted. Each man had his own story of near misses, mechanical failures, and bravery under fire. Lieutenant Richard Cole spoke quietly to Lawson. "We've changed the game, Ted. They'll never laugh at a B-25 again." Lawson nodded, absorbing the words, knowing the full cost of that change. The raid rippled far beyond the immediate destruction. Japanese military planners scrambled to bolster defenses along the coast, diverting resources that might have been used elsewhere. American morale soared. The news of Tokyo being bombed by 16 B-25s spread like wildfire, a beacon of hope in a dark period of the Pacific War. Doolittle and his men became instant legends, their courage celebrated in newspapers, radio broadcasts, and military reports. Yet the personal toll lingered. Several crews were captured, some executed, others imprisoned under brutal conditions. The survivors carried memories etched deep into muscle and mind. The roar of engines, the smell of burning cities, the weight of bombs, the screams of anti-aircraft shells exploding around them. Even in safety, the trauma remained, a shadow that followed them home. In the months that followed, the raid became a turning point, not just in strategy, but in psychology. The impossible had been done. American bombers had reached the heart of Japan, proving that distance and arrogance were no shield against courage, ingenuity, and daring. the legend of the Doolittle Raid was born. A story of audacity and sacrifice that would echo through history, inspiring generations of airmen to come. Weeks turned into months, and the men of the Doolittle Raid began to return to the United States. Some carrying medals, others carrying scars that were invisible, but no less real. Captain Ted Lawson, now celebrated for his heroism, struggled with the quiet moments. The memories of smoke-choked Tokyo, the cries of crewmen, and the weight of survival. He wrote letters home to his wife, but many thoughts remained unspoken, tucked behind the stoic face expected of a war hero. Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle reflected on the mission in official reports and personal journals. The raid had done more than strike infrastructure. It had struck at the confidence of an empire. Japanese military planners had been forced to divert forces to homeland defense, altering the course of battles across the Pacific. Strategically, the raid's tangible damage was limited, but the psychological blow was devastating, proving that audacity and meticulous planning could overcome even the most formidable defenses. For the ordinary men of the Mitchell crews, the raid became a touchstone of identity. They had flown into history, balancing death and destiny with each press of the throttle. Memories of near misses and acts of heroism were retold in mess halls and barracks, their narrative weaving into the larger story of American resilience. Some men would eventually train the next generation of bomber pilots, passing on lessons in courage, precision, and the unyielding belief that no mission was impossible. The Japanese military, stunned and humiliated, would never again underestimate the reach of American air power. Entire strategies were rewritten in response to the raid, and the myth of invulnerability was forever shattered. Meanwhile, the B-25 Mitchell, once dismissed as too slow, too vulnerable, too limited for such daring missions, earned a place in history as an aircraft that could defy expectation, carry men to the edge of the possible, and return them with stories that would inspire a nation. Years later, Lawson would speak at reunions, his voice steady but eyes distant. "We laughed in the face of fear," he would say, "but we also carried the weight of it." That mission, it wasn't about glory. It was about proving that we could do what others said was impossible. And we did. Around him, the surviving men nodded, each remembering their own moments of terror and triumph, each acknowledging the bond forged in fire, steel, and sky. The Doolittle Raid remained more than a military operation. It became a legend of human courage against impossible odds. A small flotilla of bombers had touched the heart of an empire, changed the course of a war, and left a legacy that would endure for generations. Audacity had met precision, courage had met fear, and in that meeting, history had been rewritten. Years later, long after the war had ended, the men who flew the Doolittle Raid would sit quietly, reflecting on the magnitude of what they had undertaken. Captain Ted Lawson, now older, his face lined by time and memory, often thought of the Pacific skies that April morning. The roar of engines, the tension in cramped cockpits, the fire and smoke over Tokyo. It all felt like another lifetime, yet impossibly vivid. For Lawson and his comrades, the mission was a study in contrasts. Fear and courage, chaos and precision, life and death. Each moment of terror had been intertwined with purpose. Every bomb dropped, every evasive maneuver, every engine strain was part of a larger story. A story not of destruction alone, but of audacity, ingenuity, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to accept the impossible. Historians would later dissect the raid, praising its strategic and psychological impact. But for the men who had flown, it was personal. They remembered the faces of their crewmates, some lost, some wounded, all bound by the shared experience of having stared danger in the eye and pressed onward. "We were just men," Lawson would say, "doing what we had to do." But somehow, in that moment, it felt like we were shaping history. The B-25 Mitchell, now immortalized in museums and photographs, stood as a symbol of that audacity. Engineers marveled at its reliability under conditions for which it was never truly designed. Pilots revered its responsiveness, its ability to carry men and bombs across an ocean and into enemy heartlands. And for the world, the Mitchell became more than a bomber. It became a legend, the aircraft that proved even the most improbable mission could succeed with courage and determination. As the sun set on Lawson's life, he often looked to the skies, imagining those 16 silver silhouettes slicing through the morning over Japan. He thought of Doolittle's calm, commanding presence, of crewmen shouting over engine roar, of bombs skidding across rooftops, and of a world forever changed by their audacity. The Doolittle raid had been brief, violent, and terrifying, but it had endured. Its legacy was etched in courage, in history, and in the hearts of those who had flown into the impossible and returned to tell the tale.